Well, I am redeemed. Where there was hate, love now abides.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Good News TV program. My name is Randy King. Good News TV program is brought to you by the Full Gospel Businessmen's Fellowship in Canada. And it's our privilege to be with you here today. Thank you for joining us. We are all about men sharing testimonies about the goodness of God and His life-changing power that has come into their lives. Today, our special guest is a man that originates from Montreal, Quebec, and presently resides in Steinbach, Manitoba. Donald Bouchard, real pleasure to have you here on the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right, yeah. So, Don, I know you're a businessman. Tell us a little bit about what you do for a living.
Well, 6 years ago, God called us to Steinbach, Manitoba. It was a unique call, and God has really blessed our lives there. We own a company that does fire and flood restoration for the insurance companies, and it's a great vehicle for us to do our ministry. Good.
Okay. Ministry, you say. Tell us a little bit about that, Don. What kind of ministry are you involved in?
God has really laid on my heart to do prison ministry and rehabs. I've had a lot of opportunities to deal with the underworld and people that are on drugs, and I like to go to areas where people can't reach. We've come up with a little book now about my life story. The book is all illustrated in a comic strip, and our audience are teenagers to early 30s. What we found in our ministry is that a lot of the youth don't have the reading skills, so this little booklet enables them to read through the story with the images. So awesome. The book is called Out of the Darkness. It should be on the printing press very soon. Okay.
Don, if somebody wanted to get a hold of that, how would they reach you to get one of them?
We don't have a web page yet, but our email is outofthedarknessnovella@gmail.com.
Okay, nothing like short and sweet and simple. Good. Anyways, okay, so your job occupation is just as a vehicle to do your ministry. And,
yes.
You travel to prisons and wherever you get an opportunity to do that. And I think that's an awesome thing, because there's so many people today in the marketplace, Don, that have the ability to do. God has gifted them to do, to be a blessing to others that are around them, more than just the labor of their hands. And seems like where we're at today in society is there's so many men and Christians in general that are a little bit complacent in that area of spreading what God has done, sharing what God has done in their lives. But today we got you on the show, and tell us a little bit, Don, about what has He done in your life? What was it like for you growing up in Montreal, Quebec?
Well, my father was a pastor, but I was really raised, the family fell apart, and I was raised by my mother till the age of 15, till I left home. And strange enough, my father-in-law was a collector for the mafia in the underworld of Montreal. But so I grew up very rebellious, not having a father at home, and wanting to be like the rest of the world, because my mom was a very strict believer, and she tried to protect us a lot from the outside influences. So I had determined from a very, very young age, from the time I was born, I was tossed from pillar to post. It seemed like I didn't have a moment of peace. And that's what I tried to portray in my little book, is how I was so tormented from the time I was born. And I remember the first time I tried to leave home, I was just 5 years old. And I just had that drive. I wanted to get away from discipline. I wanted to get away from godliness. And I tried to leave home. I came back, but at 15 years old, I just got kicked out of schools, and I've got whatever school I went to, I was joining the wrong gangs, and my mom had to move time and time again. And I remember one time she told me, she says, "Donald, how many houses do we have to change? How many schools?" And I said, "Mom, this time you're not moving. I'm going to move." So as I left, I had a lot of good values that I'd been, taught and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't realize how people recognized that when I was in the world. They said, "Oh, there's something different about you. What is it?" And I knew it was my godly upbringing. So I worked very, very hard at destroying that image to be part of the gang. Yeah.
To fit in.
To fit in, yeah.
Yeah, don't look different.
So I remember one day, this girl come up to me and she says, "I want to buy some drugs," right? And I said, why did you ask me? She says, "Well, when I want to buy drugs, I look for someone that looks just like you." So I thought I had achieved the goal. I said, finally, I look like a drug dealer, And so I realized that, it took a lot of work for me to pound all these good things out of myself. But, at that time, I was so rebellious. I just wanted to fit in, and I wanted to be accepted. I didn't start as a big-time dealer. I started with small stuff, and it just grew to one thing to another.
Wow. Don, do you think God ever left you in that whole time? That you were trying to pound it all out of yourself?
I always feared God. I always knew He was there. I just didn't think He'd have anything to do with a guy like me because I so opposed Him and His values and anything that had to do with Christianity. I always felt that it was a big piece of steel that I could not communicate with God. I just felt like there was nothing, there was a big separation. It just felt like heaven was a ceiling of steel. That's how I grew up, thinking that it was something I couldn't penetrate.
You couldn't make a connection.
No. So, but I always had this thing also within me that there were certain things in my life that I didn't want to get involved in because I thought to myself, what if one day I get saved? I'll have to go back and make amends. And
what do you mean by getting saved?
Well, what I mean is I knew that the people of God, I always respected them because they had something I didn't have. The problem is I didn't want what they had, but I knew what they had to be real because they would live and die for it. But it didn't matter where I went. You can try to run away from God, you can't hide. It didn't matter what city I would go into. Someone would approach me with the gospel, or I'd meet believers, or I'd see an influence somewhere, and it bothered me. And what I would do is I would just try to take that out of my mind somehow with alcohol and drugs. And I spent a lot of time on drugs, a lot of time drinking, try to appease my conscience. The conscience bothers you no matter what you do. When you've had the knowledge of God in your life, it'll follow you wherever you go. I had some really interesting experiences, though, as I went through those years of drugs and wild living. I remember selling some cocaine one time, and the guy was a pimp. And he told me, he says, "Donald, I'll turn you into a Mac, I'll turn you into a pimp." And I didn't want to get involved in that. Within a few hours, I had already had a girl working on the streets. And within a couple of weeks, I had 2 girls working on the streets. And then it went on like that. It snowballed,
And became big business.
Yeah, we made a lot of money. And people thought, you got it made, you got beautiful girls, and you're in strip clubs. And, I had it all. But inside, I was so empty. It didn't matter how much money I made. I felt so empty and so void. And, one day I went up to my hotel room. I'll never forget this experience. I went up to my hotel room, and as I got out of the elevators, I was living, I think, on the 10th or 15th floor of this high-rise where we used to sell crack, and guys used to come up to my room for a fix, and all the prostitutes used to generate from that hotel. So I go up to my room, and I went to put the key into the keyhole of my door. And as I did that, I was overwhelmed by the most satanic power that I had ever felt in my life. I had a lot of satanic experiences in my life, but this one just overthrew me. I lost complete control. I felt completely out of control. I was a pretty tough guy. Nothing really affected me, but this time I was not able to fight it. So both of my hands were reaching for my face, and I wanted to pluck my eyes out. And I wanted to scream. I was terrified, and I was powerless. My hands were just forcing towards my face. So I thought if I start screaming, all the gangsters will come out of their rooms and they'll say, Donald freaked out, and I'll lose all my turfs, right? So I crumbled to the ground, and I just put my back against the wall, and I said, "God, I promise if you take this away from me, I'll give you my life one day." And immediately when I said that, it's as if the most outstanding power of God, the love that came into that hallway, and the peace, it was tangible. I could literally taste it. It was the most perfect, beautiful, I can't describe it. I had never ever felt that in my life, even as a boy. Mm-hmm. So I was completely overwhelmed by this love, this beautiful love. It was unfathomable. So it's as if you had taken me from a deep freeze where I was shaking to death and put me in a warm, cozy room where I was surrounded with perfection and love and peace beyond understanding. Mm. So I thought to myself, wow, it was a great awakening. Mm-hmm. But I was so rebellious that as soon as that peace came into me, of course that evil spirit took off. And I went into my room and I was like, wow, in awe. And I just continued living the way I did, but it just lingered in the back of my mind. Mm-hmm. So here I was traveling 3 provinces, and we were doing a lot of pimping and stuff that I shouldn't have been doing, and committing a lot of crime. And I remember one day we had robbed an underworld club, and I just did it for fun. I used to do things for an adrenaline rush. And I remember the SWAT team coming after me that time, and they had a SWAT team and K-9 units, and they tracked me, and they found me, and they threw me in the slam. And I remember being thrown in a cell with a bunch of big guys that, were in there for violent crimes and all kinds of stuff like that. And I sat between these 2 big guys, and I thought to myself, God, what am I doing here? What has brought me to this? And I remember starting to think. And I had a lot of experiences that would bring me back to my senses. But as soon as I would be free, as soon as I came out of jail, I started doing the same things over and over again. But these things just accumulated slowly to the point where I would understand that God was calling me. One day, there was a guy who owed money, and I owed money as well. So I thought I'd settle this account, and I did the collecting, and we did the guy. It was a very ugly job. And I remember I had pulled him out of a nightclub. It was a bikers club, and I pulled him out, and I handed him over to 2 guys I had hired. And they took him outside and pounded him against a cement wall. They completely disfigured the guy, and he just dropped. And finally, they said, stop, because he was going to die. So I walked away from that scene thinking I'd reached the heights, And I'll never forget this. There's another experience that just blew me away. As I was walking away, the bartender and the disc jockey, I can't remember, the guys from the bar, they yelled at me, you're barred for life. And I was walking away all proud and arrogant. And all of a sudden, the most incredible thing happened. Remember I told you about that heaven being a piece of steel? It's as if it just unscrolled, unveiled for the very first time in my life. I felt completely exposed. I was literally walking the streets like this, like, leave me alone. I just felt God's eyes following me wherever I went. I couldn't get away from that. So we went to this other city. I was in Regina, actually. And my buddy had kidnapped a girl from Colombia. She had tracks all over her arms, and he was going to use her. And the cops were really looking for us in Calgary, so we went to Regina, and we started pimping out of there. And he left to go to another city. He went to go, and he got himself an escort service in Winnipeg, and I stayed in Regina. And no matter what hotel I would live in, I would get kicked out because the cops would come and grab me out of there. And there's a taxi driver that picked me up one night, and I asked him, I said, can you drop off my girl downtown? And that's why being here today really it touches me, because a lot of things happened to me in Regina. So the taxi driver dropped off my girl, and he looked at me in the rearview mirror, and he says, boy, he says, did you know the way you live is the way to destruction? I was a very quiet, stone-faced kind of guy, and I waited a few seconds. I didn't want to answer him right away. I said, yeah, I know that. He says, I used to be in the mafia. He says, I drank 26 ounces every night. My wife was a prostitute. But he says, one day Jesus Christ got a hold of my life, and he saved me, and he changed me completely. He says, if you come, he says, I have a little chapel just down the road here. He says, why don't you come there tonight and give your life to Jesus Christ? So I thought, wow, I'm cornered by this guy, right? Mm-hmm. What did I do to deserve this? Right. So I waited about 15 seconds to 20 seconds, and I thought, what do I tell this guy to get rid of him? And I said to him, I said, you know what? I said, even if I go to your church tonight, I can't get saved. He says, why is that? I said, I come from a good Christian home, and I got a praying mother. If I want to make things right, that's where I got to go. And here I thought I had put him in his corner. And he looked at me again, and he says, you know what? He says, you're right. He says, if you come to my church tonight, you can't get saved. I thought, what's wrong with this guy? And he says, I'll tell you what I'll do for you. He says, I'm going to drive you to the airport right now. He says, I'll buy your airfare. And he says, you go home and make things right. It just blew me away. I was so touched by that. It was like, wow, this guy is real. He had a testimony, but he had the life that went with it. He wasn't trying to get me into his religion. He was just trying to lead me to Christ. And it really, really bothered me. And I said, his name was Mike Breckenridge. I found him a couple of years after I got saved, and I witnessed it. I told him how I'd gotten saved, and we exchanged a few thoughts. He was so happy. I wanted him to know that his testimony was not in vain.
Yeah.
That night when he dropped me off at the club, I walked in there, and there was a lot of players at that club, and I walked in there, sat at the bar, and the bartender came up to me. He says, what are you going to have? I said, nothing. I couldn't drink. I was so convicted. I knew I wasn't living right. That thought never, ever left me. And then God just started working in my life. And I remember one day I was I don't know, it wasn't necessarily a crack house, but guys used to get, shoot themselves up and smoke up. I was downstairs in this house, and I was all stoned and hammered, and all of a sudden God started moving in my heart, and I started testifying. I said, I know of a place where you can go and get changed. And I was all wired, and I remember one guy looking at me, he says, whoa, the guys thought I was freaking out. And I said, no, I know of a place you can go and get saved. So all these guys were all stoned, and they were starting to feel weird about this. And I remember one guy got up and he says, Donald, he says, if you give your life to God, he says, I'm going to follow you. And shortly after, God led me to go to Montreal to my mom's church, and that's where it all happened.
Don, we got about 8 or 10 minutes left. So you went home to Montreal, you made it right.
Yes.
And a brand new journey began. We've heard a journey that's pretty dark, really, just from some of the details you've given us. I know for a fact there's all kinds of people that could be potentially listening that have had a lot of the experiences that you've had, and they need to hear that there's hope, there's a way out. Even the part of, not everybody's growing up in a home where Christianity was taught. Lots have, and have never returned to that after they left. Fortunately, you returned to it. But let's hear a few stories on the lighter side of things. You got married. Little bit, just kind of a neat story about your father-in-law, just real quick, because we're running out of time, and I want to hear some of the brighter stories.
I had seen my father-in-law. He walked into a gospel meeting one day, and he wanted to kick the guy's face in at the door that was giving out songbooks, because he thought he was a bouncer.
Yeah.
So he thought, I'm going to kick this guy's face in.
Right? He knew nothing.
He
about
didn't know
church.
The gospel.
He knew nothing.
Nothing. Right.
Yeah.
This is in Montreal, right on Skid Road.
Yeah.
So he goes and sits in the back, and then he was with a buddy, and the guy, and the service started. Just unraveled, and he didn't know what was going on, but he kept eyeing that guy, and I'm going to take him down, right? And the anointing of the Holy Spirit was present, very present. And they used to have an altar call, and then the preacher used to ask everybody to get down on their knees. So he says, I can't go up there. He says, God will have nothing to do with me. So he got down on his knees, but his buddy went to the front, and he thought, well, he must be way better than I am, because I ain't going up there. So he sat there, and he started to pray, trying to pray, I guess, and God kind of spoke to him. So he got up and he went to the altar call. And halfway to the front, the power of God hit him. And he was completely converted. Yeah. And he became best friends with the guy at the door. Yeah, they were really tight-knit.
Something you said, though, there, Don, about, your father-in-law was a mafia hitman.
Yeah.
He was a bad dude.
Yeah, he was.
Now, this is Montreal, Quebec. Not rural Saskatchewan, obviously. But you made a valid point that he didn't think he was good enough. Don't you think that there's a lot of people nowadays that are wanting a change in their life, but they don't think they're good enough? I don't think God will accept me the way I am. But that's the total opposite, right?
What I found out in my life, Randy, is Jesus loved me when I was yet in my sins. Yeah. He loved me when I was dirty. And
that's what he says in his word. While we were yet sinners, he died for us.
See, we're deceived, right? We think that Christ doesn't. He died for us.
Yeah.
He died for me. He died for my father-in-law. He died for people that have been abused and tormented by evil spirits and all that kind of stuff. And it's the enemy's game to make you believe that he'd have nothing to do with you. And when you understand that, I remember when I first came to Montreal, I told the minister, I said, I'm coming here to die. Can God save me?
Yeah.
You know, kind of
Because
thing.
your health was in bad shape.
I was gone. I had months to live.
You had literally wore yourself out.
Yeah, completely gone. And the minister looked at me and said, why would God kill you? He said, he brought you here to save you.
Yeah.
So I got interested, and I started to pray, and I prayed and prayed and prayed, and people would get up and testify and say they got saved and God's power touched them and all that. And I looked at them, and I was envious. And here I'm on my knees at every altar call praying, and I mean, I was really sincere. And all of a sudden, one night, you know, something happened in the day that led me to quit smoking, and I threw my cigarettes in the garbage, and I went to the meeting that day, and I prayed to God. I said, God, if I don't come out of here a new man, I'm coming out of here a dead man, because I wanted to kill myself. And as I left the prayer room, the minister came to see me, to shake my hand, and I shook hands. And I said to the minister, I said, I tried to quit smoking today. Can you pray for me? And the minister said, I'll pray for you. And the minute that minister laid hands on my head, the power of God hit me. It hit me, and I dropped to my knees, and I started to cry. And I said, God, take everything. And I got up from there. I was completely transformed. That love and that joy and that peace that I felt in that hallway in that hotel room that night, it came back, but in multiple times, and it never left me.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And God restored your health?
Completely. Within, I don't know how much weight I put on. Within a couple of weeks, I just came right back as if I was resurrected from the dead.
Yeah.
I went back across Canada to witness to all the gangsters and street people and all the prostitutes, and showed them what God had done for me. And people couldn't recognize me. Wow. I remember one of the girls on the street, she told me, she said, is that you? I'm going to faint. She was going to pass out because she thought it was unreal to see how I had changed.
Because you'd so wore yourself out with the lifestyle
I
that you were living.
remember people used to look at me. I remember going to court one time. I puked from the hotel all the way out, going up the stairs in court. I was throwing up in the stairs.
Wow.
And the lawyer looked at me and he said, whoa, you can't show up in court like that.
Yeah.
But I was green. I was falling apart. I was completely destroyed by the lifestyle. Eh?
So no matter how low we go, God can raise us up, can't he?
You know, the funny thing is, Randy, that you say that way, because I find that some of the people that were taken out of the dungeons, God made them shine so much.
Right.
And God has used them so much, you know, because to whom much is forgiven, much will love, right?
Yeah. And it seems like those are the ones that are willing, the most willing, to do something for God after they've been, set free from that style of life. And Don, we've got about 4 minutes left here. What would you say to the audience in terms of somebody that may be where you were? Two illustrations, perhaps. Somebody that is where you were at the very bottom, obviously, like in appearance, and then there's others that are also at the bottom, but they look like they got it all going on, right?
It's so true.
But yet they're as lost as the guy that's on Skid Row. They got good jobs, they got a nice home, they got the nice clothes, they got the good lifestyle, so-called, but yet they're just as lost. What do you got to say to both sides of this? We got just a few minutes left.
You see, I've seen a lot of people die in my time, and I just wished when I got saved, I wanted everybody to feel what I felt. I was a firebomb. I mean, I was on fire. I'd tell everybody how God set me free. The big thing that people have to understand is it's not hard to get saved. We got to get that out of our minds, that it's our human efforts. You know, when we're willing to let go 100% of who we are and take on what God wants us to be, you know, God will just come and reign in your life. You know, when I came to the Lord, I really repented of everything. I said, Lord, I know I want this new life. What I didn't expect is that it would come in such great volumes, like everything. God has blessed me and flourished me. Yeah. I think people really need to get down into the simplicity of the gospel. It just, you know, pray in your heart and ask. There's not one person who sincerely prays to the Lord Jesus Christ that will not be met. I don't care who you are. I've talked to people from different faiths. I was a missionary 11 years on the ocean with the sailors. And it didn't matter what religion, what background. When they were sincere and said, Lord, I want to meet you. Lord, I want an experience with you. God would meet that one way or another. It's infallible. God promised in His Word that He would meet you. And, you know, some people, like you say, it doesn't show, but they have such an empty feeling, you know, an empty feeling. God is the only one who can saturate you and fill you with contentment and love and peace. And it's available through a simple prayer to acknowledge, Jesus, I need you in my life.
Yeah.
I need you, and really mean it.
Yeah, I personally believe everybody is born with a hole in their heart that I call the God hole. It's a hole in their heart that no matter how successful you are in life, or unsuccessful, whatever the case may be, there's that hole that no matter what you put into it, it can't be filled. There's only one thing that can fill it, and that's God. That's why it's the God hole. It's only He that can fill that hole and make your heart and your life complete. And so what we want to do today is challenge you people that are watching in our audience. If you've got a spiritual need in your life, if you're in a deficit, spiritually bankrupt perhaps, might look good. Things might look good on the outside, they might not. You might be in the deepest hole of life right now. Just cry out to God. Say, God, I need you. I want you. I'm willing to surrender my life to you, make a difference in my life. Come into my heart. Fill that God hole. I want to be complete, and I want to be complete in you. He will do it just as for you, just as He's done it for Dawn. Dawn or anybody else is there. God is no respecter of persons, and He loves you as much as He loves Dawn or anybody else. And we want to thank you for joining our show. To thank you, Dawn, and keep up the good work. Yes. I pray doors will continue to open for you in your ministry. And God bless you all. Bye-bye for now.
Where there was hate, love now abides. Where there was confusion, peace now reigns. I'm walking with Jesus. I'm a child of the King. And it's all because I'm redeemed. I'll tell her